Okay, and you didn't deserve it. Okay, and favor is like a gift. Okay, so that's what grace is. To show grace real quick, what's important to realize is that grace comes from chara, which this is charis, and if you put an alpha here instead of it looks like an is to you, it would be joy. And so grace is supposed to bring you joy. It's a blessing, and you see it as that. So back to our verse, and you want to get grace because realize we do not earn grace from God. We receive it. It's something we're blessed with. It's nothing you can go out there today and say, well, I'm going to work real hard and try to get in God's favor, get in God's grace. No, you get there by faith, and that's what we're going to see today for just a moment. But if it is by grace, then it is no longer of works. You can't earn this thing since grace no longer would become grace. So we see it probably best in Ephesians 2:8-9. Many of you are very familiar with this verse. For by grace you are the ones who have been saved. So you're saved by grace, but how do we get it? We get it by faith. Faith is the human response to God's message. Faith is that human response that we have when we hear a message of God and we apply it to our lives, and specifically on salvation here, it's a response to the invitation God has for us. That you can be saved, that you can have forgiveness of sins, you can be washed clean and start life all over. The God of a second chance, third, fourth, fifth chances. We've had a lot of them. We're cats that have had 9 lives, probably most of us. And so it is God. Faith is man's response to God's invitation. This is not from you. It's not of you. It is a gift. It's a gift is something you don't earn. A gift is something you receive. Verse 9 just says the same thing we've already said. Not from works, that no one should boast. I know that when I was first saved and talked to people, some people had their concept when I said, well, I know I'm saved. They say, well, you must think you're pretty good. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying we know God is really good and that God has extended grace to us. Okay? So understanding that, that's where we ended a couple weeks ago. Let's go to verse 7 of Romans 11. What therefore? What Israel was seeking, he did not obtain, but those chosen had obtained it, and the rest were hardened. Looking at that last word, hardened, we're going to speak on that a little bit here today, because when people come to Christ, God starts doing a work in their life. When we see our lives change, it's not just because we are changing, but God begins to influence us. He begins to help us through life. And we really can't do it without God. John 15 is very clear, except we abide in the vine, the branch, abide in the vine. We can't do nothing of ourselves. So you can be good. Even as a Christian, you just really can't do it. Ours is to obey, ours is to hear the message, come under God, and then allow God to work in our lives. So one of the things is, are you allowing that process to take place? It's a process in your life. Some process goes faster the more we, by faith, receive God's message, and the more we submit to it, the faster we'll grow. So, I'll get a question with this verse. When you come to God, you either, there's a choice. Actually, you have a choice of either coming to God or not coming, so it's kind of a dual question here. But you either become hard or soft. Now, if you submit to God, which one is it that happens? You become soft. When you begin to reject God's message, what happens? You get hard. When you get angry and upset with people, have you ever noticed your heart starts getting hard toward them? Okay, if you forgive them, do you start becoming softer to them again? Becoming nicer and kinder? Yeah. So this becomes an issue of you receiving God's message, and you will be willing to allow God to work. Again, if we get bitter, we get upset, we have conflict, we have a choice. Do we get bitter or better? Okay, that's our choice. Do we allow God to work in us? Now, if not, then there's the hardening process that even God says in here that rejection of him, will happen. It will be the event in our life. We're going to read verses 8 through 11 and kind of keep these verses together. So we're going to comment on all of them here. Starting with 8. Just as it has been written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that do not see, and ears that do not hear to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare, and for a prey, and for a trap, and for retribution to them. Let their eyes be darkened to see not, and their back always bowing, or bending, you could say. I say, therefore, did they not stumble for the purpose that they might fall? The answer is no. It should not possibly happen. It should not possibly be. But by their fall, salvation came to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Back to verse 8. My wife and I, for years, when we've had situations come up, we've had people stay with us. People lose housing, people are in between housing, people are struggling in life with some things. And so they've stayed with us. We had this one gal who was, she was in our church, and we had, she kind of came in through a ministry within the church. She had a baby, and the court CPS came in and took the baby from her. And she wanted to reunify, and the court gave her opportunity to reunify, but she had to show steps of being a parent that was going to parent her child well. And so she lost custody, care, and control, but she wanted to reunify. The problem was she lived in an area and she had people in her life that was involved with drugs and drinking, and everybody around her. I mean, that was her culture. Okay? So a lot of times in these situations when they're in our church and that, we go to court with them and found out her situation, that we allowed her to move in with us. She began the rebuilding process in our home. She stayed with us for a whole year. And during that time, she went enrolled in a specific trade in school, and she got straight A's. She was like the model student. And matter of fact, the people liked her so much they took pictures of her, and they made her the model student. They put her on her brochures and that. And she graduated with A's in the year's time. We went back to court. She was reunified with her baby, and her baby came to live with us too. But I began, and I had noticed some things in her life. When you do not fully accept the things of God, it becomes evident in issues in your life. One thing I noticed, I'm just going to talk about it generally, and then we're going to look at the text. One thing that happens is it's very difficult for them to fellowship. See, light doesn't fellowship with darkness. And if there's still darkness in your life, then it doesn't fellowship. And so you might find it difficult to say, I try to talk to them about Christ, but we never connect. You find it a struggle. When you get spiritual people together, they connect easily. You don't even have to know them. You can see them at a campground. You can see them down at the beach. You can hook up to them at work. Wherever you are, you will find that connection, because fellowship, koinonia, comes from koinos, which means common. And you have the thing in common of God in your life. And the things of God are common in your life. So it's easy. Okay, but these people, and I started noticing, we really didn't have spiritual conversations. See, you can come to church, you can pray, you can talk to people about God, you can say you're a Christian, but there's an element that changes our life. Jesus said when you get saved, you are born again. And he referenced what's that to, was to spiritual birth. And now you have spiritual newness in your life. And it really is newness. And it's a whole, a new dimension. The spiritual dimension opens up to you. And so you're aware that they don't have that. You also start becoming aware that they have friendship with this world. What I mean is, people will find it easier to talk to lost people than it is to talk to Christians. And that's a sign when you see that. And I have people tell me that's a sign. They lack a love for the Word of God. And so I could go on with this list, and I want to get to the biblical list here, but I began to notice that she was struggling. Matter of fact, I was so concerned, I sat down with her several times. And I sat down with her and talked to her about it. I said, what direction are you going? What are you going to do now? You get your baby back. You need to grow. She lacked any spiritual direction, but she also lacked, she began gravitating back to the old lifestyle. It's kind of like Lot's wife. The warning was don't look back, right? Okay, get on track, get going. What did she do? She looked back. There was something that caused her to have that look. Well, the short of the story, some of you that have known me for a while, is she came home one night, she was in her room, and I kept hearing the baby cry, and I'm thinking, well, let me go in there and see what's wrong. And Mary thought, well, let's just wait a little bit longer. And I finally went in, and she had used heroin again. She was in a coma on the ground. The baby was crying. We called 911. They came, and they were not able to bring her back, and she died on the floor. And this message is so important because what we're about to look at, it's signs of what's happening to people when they reject the message of God. We need to realize, even as Christians, now understand the Bible has one interpretation. Okay, it has really a true translation and then one interpretation, but there are many applications. And so you need to understand, you can take this sometimes and understand, if you go down a trail as a Christian and you start rejecting God's message, then you will find some of these same type of events happening in your life. Because whether you're saved or not saved, if you play in dirt, you get dirty. Right? Okay, so I want that to be understood as we go here. So I want to start actually, this is pretty intense. Let's start in verse 7 just for one moment. And notice it says, and the rest were hardened. Okay, one of the things that happens in the life is they're hard. Now, as we get hardened, God allows that process, and actually, He hardens us more. That process is a hardening, and we know spiritually we're supposed to be soft. So there's usually an antithesis here. That's going something that there's, God, you're either a peacemaker or a troublemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? So you're either a peacemaker or a troublemaker. You're either looking for love and that, and or you begin to become hateful or bitter. Just an example, Ephesians 4:32, real quick, because here's that harden, and it says this: be kind to one another, tender-hearted. Listen, you're either tender-hearted or you're hard-hearted. And you need to look at the condition of your life, what's happening to you. And I catch this in my own life sometimes. You get upset about something and you get hard towards somebody. Have you ever caught that and you just irritated? And so you've got to catch yourself in that and realize that love is kind. 1 Corinthians 13, right? Love is kind. So if you're truly loving, even though you're feeling estranged, even though you're feeling like something's wrong in your relationship with this person, the Bible still tells you that if you're a loving person, you're going to show kindness. You don't want to, but you do it anyway, because that's what God says to do. So you have the antithesis here of being tenderhearted, or going to, back to verse 7 of chapter 11, or you get hard. And this is what happens when you reject. Now, understand, I say this over and over because I hope you get it, and I hope you'll spend time in the Gospels, because when you do, you will notice what happens to Jesus' message. People either came to listen and they accepted it and they realized this makes sense, this is right. Or they rejected Christ and they turned bitter. And there's terms that are used in the original language that they became, I like the word snotty. The word literally means they stuck their nose up at him. And so I think that's probably best by our idiom, they became snotty. So the issue there is that, just imagine this again, that Jesus heals a blind person. And they said, he can't be of God. What is this guy doing, And they asked the parents, well, was this, who did this? How did this happen? They said, we don't know, talk to him. They were afraid of the religious leaders. But just imagine, folks, if your child was blind or had a demon or was a paralytic and Jesus healed them, would you be rejoicing? Would you be spiritually able to see that God had done something? Or would you be accusing Jesus of doing something wrong? Well, when you read the Gospels, they accused Jesus of doing something wrong. When he healed on the Sabbath, he saw a man's hand, it was withered, and he said, stretch it out. He stretched it out, and it went out whole. And he was healed. The Pharisees, what did they say? Jesus cannot be of God because he did this on a Sabbath. Come on, does it say anywhere that you know of any verse in the Old Testament, New Testament, that says you cannot heal on the Sabbath? Nothing. That you can't say, stretch out your hand, be healed? You're just talking. And yet they accuse him of casting out demons by the devil. They accused him of healing in his own power and of being wicked, and he cannot be of God. And so when you read it, what happens is they follow this message that we're giving today, that as you reject the message of God and you reject the miracles of Jesus Christ, that what you start doing is you become hard. But the rest of this will come into play too. Let's look at verse 8. Just as it has been written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that do not see, and ears that do not hear to this very day. Okay, the first one is they became hard instead of soft, right? The second one here is he gave them a spirit of stupor. I struggled with that verse and how to translate stupor. It's the word to be sleepy. So, they gave him a spirit of sleep or sleepiness, and it just doesn't sound great, so everybody uses stupor, so I did. But here, you spiritually sleep instead of following the admonition in the Bible. Several times it says, be on the alert, or it says, be awake. You were familiar with some of those verses? This is the opposite. This is the antithesis of that. That when you start to reject God's message, you get sleepy. And when you're not, you are alive and you're awake and you're in it when you come to God. Matter of fact, messages don't put you to sleep. Reading the Bible doesn't. You can stay awake when you're on top of it. And so here he says the second one is he gave him a spirit of sleepiness, eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear to this very day. I'm amazed as the messages of Christ that they could hear the greatest teacher that has ever taught and not get anything out of it. Isn't that amazing? They could see his miracles and think the devil, did it. How many remember Flip Wilson? Well, you're dating yourself, raising your hand. And he always said, well, the devil made me do it. Right? Well, he did not. He did not. And they're rejecting it. And we fall asleep and we fall in this trap that we just see and we hear, but we're not getting anything out of it. That connection is not made. Listen, the important thing for you is to make a connection with Christ. And spiritually, you'll be able to receive. If you are healthy, you get hungry. I get hungry more than 3 times a day is the problem. And so I'm very healthy, by the way, that way. So if you're hungry, if you are spiritual, you get hungry spiritually. As newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word that you may grow thereby. You just naturally long for the word of God and for spiritual truth. So these were blind to it. They just they can sit in a message and not connect. They can sit and hear or see the things of God happening. Imagine seeing blind man Bartimaeus healed. Imagine having your friend that was paralytic, quadriplegic, and he healed him. And what did the Pharisees say? Again, they scoffed at Jesus, saying it can't be of God. Now, how many times you have miracles like that happen? Not often. So when we do see God, we need to be able to recognize God's hand in things. And here's a challenge to you today. Learn to recognize that in your own life. We can miss things where God has helped us, and we even pat ourselves on the back that we just did real good. We just got some award, or we just got, we scored a touchdown, and we could take all the praise. And maybe God is involved in your life in some of these things. You need to be careful to recognize God at work helping you, answering your prayers, and you forgot you even prayed about that. Verse 9 goes on to say some of the areas of rejection is this. David is just hot on this, and it says, David said, let their table become a snare and a prey and a trap for retribution. 4 things. First of all, the snare. The word snare is actually like a little bird snare, or it's literally a trap. And so when you reject God's messages, or people reject the message of God, they start getting trapped by people. Have you ever noticed that? Things just get bad? And if you don't turn to God, you can keep falling in this trap. But it warns. David is saying, let them be entrapped by things. Then he says, let them be a prey, P-R-E-Y. That word means to be, it's like, have you ever noticed in any animal show a lion chasing a gazelle or something? Well, the gazelle is the prey, and the lion is chasing. The word means to be that game or the animal that's being pursued, and they become a prey to something. You are now not being trapped, but something is chasing you. And I've had people tell me sometimes, Pastor, things are going bad. It seems like I'm trapped in this. I'm trapped in business. I'm trapped in relationships. I'm trapped in finances. I'm trapped in my bills. And I get all these phone calls, and they're always chasing me. Trouble is after you. Remember what God told Cain. Sin is crouching at the door. Chapter 4, I think it is. Sin's crouching at the door. Beware, right? And so you become a prey. And now this word trap, that was one of the words I think you have there. We got confused on having all the words for overhead, but we have scandalon for you. Don't we have scandalon? Hello? Scandalon. Okay. That's the word we get scandalous from. It's a scandal. That is the word that, if you remember, I've said this before, but for people, if you think of a bear trap and you take the claws and you pull them down and all the teeth and you set it, then in the middle of it there's a little plate, a metal plate. On that you put the meat to trap the animal. That piece of metal is the scandalon. Okay? And so he says, what he's saying here, back to our verse now, he's saying, well, let traps be set, let traps or snares be set for them, let them be as an animal that's being pursued by a lion or another, their prey, they're running for their lives, and let them be baited. Have you ever talked to somebody that's baiting you? You say, that question, I can tell they're after something, and you get nervous about the way they're asking you. Well, he says, these are signs of rejection of God's message, he says spiritually. These troubles begin to haunt you, and they begin to follow you. And the last one is for retribution to them. And basically, this word retribution, hard to translate. Let me tell you, you know what podiatry is, right? A podiatrist is someone with a foot doctor. Well, this has that word foot in it, and it has the word in it to be against your foot. In other words, they're catching your, basically, it's catching your foot. So now let them have a retribution. Let them be caught. Let their foot be caught. And you'll see this in football today. There'll be shoestring tackles, and there'll be somebody that just barely grabs their foot, but they trip them up. So you could probably translate it a lot of that if you use it metaphorically like that, let them be tripped up or something. But these are, again, this is a warning to beware. There's these little signs of things happening in your life. You struggle with listening to a message and hearing the things of God and having a connection with God. You struggle with seeing things, God doing miracles in people's lives, and that you struggle to see, well, that's kind of coincidence, isn't it? Weren't they going to a doctor and maybe the doctor took care of it? You find your heart getting hard, or you see people's hearts getting hard. All these things are signs that there's a rejection of the things of God in their life. Verse 10. Let their eyes be darkened, very similar to what we already said, to see not, and their back always bowing. The word means to be bending or bowing, referencing most probably it's either in pain or it's in service. And so here the context would be more in service. You find yourself always having to serve others. You can get so far in debt that every time you pay, you're not ever getting out of debt, really, you're just serving people, right? You can get yourself in a situation in life where you find yourself always getting behind and you just bend and bow and work, and it's like the song goes, 16 tons, what do I get? Another day older, and I'm deeper in debt. And so here it can be a very real thing in your life that there's retribution, that there's something coming upon you, and what it is that you find yourself not only trapped, but just a slave to others. And you can't seem to get out of it. Verse 11. I say, therefore, did they not stumble for the purpose that they might fall? The answer in the original is no, but the first part, no, it should not possibly happen. Very emphatic. It's that optative mode that's only used 67 times in the whole New Testament. But here I want to bring out for the purpose that. This is the hina clause again, and so this is it. God never had a purpose to trap you. God never had a purpose that he would take you and stumble and make it bad. He says, no, listen, you're getting the wrong message. That was not the way God does things, or is not the way God does things. So he didn't do that for the purpose that, the hina clause. And remember, every now and then somebody asks me and doesn't understand the hina. Hina is the Greek word. That's how you pronounce it, hina. And it's telling you this is the purpose, this is the why, this is the reason. You say, well, why did God do that? Well, it surely wasn't the reason for this. That wasn't God's purpose, was it? No, it wasn't God's purpose. The answer is there. But it says, but what it turned out with is their fall, salvation came to the Gentiles and made them jealous, or to make them jealous. In other words, because they are rejecting Christ, the message went out even more to the Gentiles because of that. Now the next verse tells us something important that adds to it. We're done with this next verse. Shorter message today, but verse 12. But if their fall is riches for the world, and their defeat is riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fullness be? This if, remember there's 4 types of ifs, a conditional sentence in the original language. This is number 1, which means since. And he said, this is what happened. But catch this. If your ship comes in, and you're a parent in here, or really anybody in here, you say you win $50,000. What do people do with the $50,000? Give me something. Go ahead and shout it out. What does somebody do with it? Buy a car. Okay. Well, that's what they should do, Jonesy. Save it and do wisely. Very few do that. Okay. Other than wise Jonesy over there, what they like Tanya, they'll buy a car. New house, or, well, that's not going to buy you a house, but it might give you a part of a down payment. What else?
Take a trip.
Clothes. Did I say somebody say clothes? A boat. Oh, that's good. What?
Take a trip.
Take a trip. Yeah, they'll take a trip they always wanted to take. They'll buy clothes. They'll go out to dinner. You don't even have to have a big landfall. You say, hey, this is cool. Let's go out and eat, right? And so you'll go out and eat, and you take. The point is who enjoys that car with you? Who enjoys that meal with you? Who enjoys the benefit of that? Your whole family does, right? If you win it, you don't say, well, this is mine. Honey, I'm sorry. You don't get to go. I'm going out to dinner. You stay home. You stay home and take care of the kids. No, matter of fact, you would probably not wake up the next day. He said, that's the last thing I remember I said. No, she gets to go and the kids get to go and they all go out. Everybody receives the benefits of that, right? You get a car, you all get a ride in it. If you're going to take a trip, they all go. I know when I start talking about it, I say, Mary, we start planning a trip. We plan to go on a cruise. We're trying to be like Ricky and Mike. They go on all these cruises and that. He just got back from a cruise yesterday. But you say, I'm going to plan for a cruise. My girls will say, do we get to go? I say, no, this is for me and Mom. And they're going, why can't we go? And now I've got to include them on our cruise or some trip. They want to come too. So what I'm saying is that when you see somebody awarded a prize, you see somebody elected president or something, they stand on the platform and their children are up there with them, and they're all receiving the praise, and they're all receiving this. That's what this next verse says. How much more will their fullness be? Listen, if we get this because they failed, just think how much it'll be when the Jews are really blessed. That's what it's saying. Just how great. See, because we are recipients with Christ. We've got to get that. When God treats people good. I remember when I was a kid and I prayed, and God, I want this, and I worked, and I got this mini bike. I was a little 12-year-old. Me and my friends got out there, and we made trails in the mountain, and we had races and stuff, and everybody got to ride it. You just got on it and played and that. When somebody gets something good, you usually benefit with them. If the Chargers score today, that's a condition of third class. It's not certain. But if they score today, everybody in the stands are going to think they scored too. As a matter of fact, they're going to say, we scored. If you're home watching TV, you're going to say, we did it. And if we win the game, who is going to win the game? We won the game. They partake. So the fullness comes from God in all this. And if you're walking with God, that's the point. If you're not, you have the antithesis here, or the opposite. You would say, if there's a rejection of God's message, all spiritual things begin to happen. And life is not good. And I've noticed as a pastor, I've been a pastor for 41 years. No, God bless you. Yeah, I only look 41 years old, right? So, but in that time, I have watched people come to Christ, and as they begin to follow the path of God, I've watched how God blesses their life. And then you watch a little bit of coldness come in, and just indifference, a little bit of sleepiness come in, and all of a sudden they're not in church as much, and all of a sudden this happens. And then I start hearing things aren't going so well. I mean, it's just like the book of Judges. If you want to understand this principle, read the book of Judges. When the people of God turn to God, they're blessed, they're restored. Then they get blessing and they go, oh my, this is nice. I can buy a car, I can buy a boat. And then they're taking trips, and then they're riding their boat on Sunday mornings, and then, or the Sabbath or whatever. But you read Judges and you see it over and over. Then they fall and they tear it, and they cry out to God, God help us, and God helps them, and they're restored again, and the pattern is over. The entire book of Judges is that way. So we need to understand, don't fall into that trap. You should always be praising God. You should keep that connection. You should always be praying that God has a message for you. You should be praying today that when events take place, you get better, not bitter. You should be praying that when you have events happen, that you learn to still, because you are spiritually minded, you're going to be kind to someone who's been mean to you. Do they deserve it? No, but God tells us to give them grace anyway. Number one thing people say to me, they say, Pastor, they don't deserve it. I said, well, neither did you when God gave you grace. So give them grace. So you should be able to take this message and be warned. The application to a Christian would simply be, don't fall in the same traps, scandals, baits, sleepiness, spiritual eyes that cannot see. Keep yourself aware and soft before God, not hard, that you can see God working. And beware of those traps, because they still happen to us as Christians. 1 Corinthians warned us, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So be warned. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this word.